Yo, what up? So I'm currently employed as both a teacher and a student, very different capacities. This is my girlfriend Melissa, who for the first time of her life has become like a school teacher here in China for the last couple of months. She's been teaching children. We live in China, but it's a very unusual part of China. We're surrounded by palm trees and tropical fruit. That's a pomelo, approximately the size of my head. Oh, here's one that's open too. Yeah, right. Yeah, we're surrounded. That wasn't planned, but we're actually surrounded by giant tropical fruit. And just outside the window, there are palm trees. We're on the border between Yunnan and Myanmar. So culturally, ethnically, linguistically, very, very unusual part of China. Fascinating, beautiful part of China. But she's been teaching children here. And I wanted to make a video talking about motivation in education and learning for myself as an autodidact, in a university context, in learning languages, in life. One of the things that put this on my mind was actually seeing a video from Vegan Gains talking about motivation in weight loss and weightlifting, fitness. And it made me reflect on how in some ways motivation in language learning is similar and in some ways it's different. For myself personally, a lot of my life, I've been a very mission-based learner. My motivation has been linked to a definite sense of a defined mission of outcomes I was pursuing. And it is true when I compare myself to other students or on a job, in a job setting, other people who are working with me, my very high levels of motivation, it almost seemed like a superpower. You know, it seemed like I was doing so much more than the people around me who were not motivated. Now, whether it's from a teacher standpoint or from a student standpoint, I think there is a bit of a danger here. Motivation becomes fetishized and exaggerated in its significance as this kind of meta virtue, the virtue of all virtues, or the virtue that's the basis for all other virtues. For one thing, because it's not so safe or easy for us to talk about differences in intelligence, aptitude, even preparation. You know, why is one student better than another? Well, maybe one student has sober parents who are themselves school teachers who've really taught them how the system works and teach them how to study and help them with what they're doing at home. And another student has parents who are angry alcoholics who hate the education system and don't help them this way. You know, there are differences that are not safe to talk about. And what is safe to talk about from the educator's perspective, and I think even from students talking amongst themselves, what's safe to talk about is motivation. People can riff on this without any danger of offending other people. But it's really easy to kind of sort students in your own mind, or even to explain to yourself why you perform well in some contexts and not in others in terms of motivation. Say, oh, this student isn't really very motivated. This other student was super motivated, so he did well. See it this way. And again, I think that's true. When you look back in your own life, it's really easy to say, oh, well, I wasn't motivated this time for this reason. Either, like, it could be that you're not interested in subject matter. It could be, oh, I was busy with my ex-boyfriend or something. You know, like there were other things in your mind. There were other things you were doing where you can perceive your own performance purely in terms of motivation.
Yeah, and from a teacher's perspective, you can pick out students like, oh, well, this one is performing better because he's more motivated. Or this one isn't because his parents just want him to be here. And
Right. The parents want him to be here and the child doesn't or something. Yeah. Anyway, whether it's in an adult workplace situation or children or university context, it's really easy for motivation to take on this great importance without us maybe thinking too precisely about what motivation is. And in this video, that's exactly what I want to talk about, is precisely what motivation is and the way different types of motivation shape what you're doing. Now, I think about human nature and the mind a lot in terms of instinct, which is a difference between myself and the vast majority of philosophers who've published on these things. You know, I think one of the strongest motivations for human beings is fear. And you can be motivated to learn by fear. So I want to give two examples from my own life. I don't know, I may have mentioned one of these to you. But one of the examples was when I was living in Laos during a certain period. I lived in Laos for 2.5 years. But when I was living in the capital city of Laos, I had a very real, very pragmatic fear that at any time I could be taken over to the side of the road by corrupt police officers or corrupt army officials. And might not be on the side of the road. Once they came to my house, they came to my bedroom. So you could be interrogated by the police or army officials at any time in Laotian. And most likely they'd be trying to just get money out of you. You know, they'd be trying to accuse you of something. You know, it wouldn't be a sincere interrogation. Now, so I just say this is not a ludicrous fear or something. Other white people living in Laos at that time could also talk about this.
So you had to learn Laotian so that in situations like this, you'd be able to handle it.
Well, no, the vast majority of white people living in those conditions didn't. The vast majority of people didn't respond to it that way. Right. But for me, that provided an impetus. That provided a grounding in fear of, I have to be ready to defend myself in a legal sense of, like give a defense of my character or what I'm here or what I'm doing at any time. At any time I could be taken over and interrogated. Anytime I could be extorted. That's really what it's trying to extort money by men in uniform. And I have to be able to talk a good game. So that is a fear-based motivation. That's very real. But believe me, I was surrounded by other white people living in the same who didn't respond to it that way at all. Some of them responded by just paying bribes, or I met people who had different strategies, whatever the strategies were. I remember one woman, and she probably wouldn't have gotten away with it if she was a white woman. She had a Laotian boyfriend, and whenever policemen or soldiers tried to interrogate her questions way, she just looked straight ahead, ignored them, and drove away or walked away, whatever situation. And again, I think it is just because she's a woman. She was a white woman. They didn't just pounce on her or handcuff her or beat her or whatever. You can't do that. She was living there for a couple of years. It doesn't anyway. So actually,
she gave you this advice, like, okay, so if you ever get in this situation, just look straight ahead and walk away. Works for me every time.
I think she did give noobs. I think she gave new arrivals that advice, but I was a little bit too old in the game. But I was looking at her like, dude, what do you think? Yeah. But also for me, like, if this is my home, I was living there permanently for my, Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're just a tourist or something, that's different. But come on, this is my hood. Mm-hmm. This is my hood. Who the fuck are you? If you're going to interrogate me, I've got to stand up and say, yeah, this is my home. I'm not from anywhere else. And that time, that was really true. I didn't have a home back in Canada or anywhere else. Anyway, so that is an example, and that fear-based pressure. Now, it doesn't mean I'm wake up in the morning and I'm trembling in fear. That is a powerful motivation. And I did really learn Laotian like 10 times faster than the other white people around me. Yes, there were other inequalities involved. There are inequalities of intelligence and preparation and what have you. But remember, I had no formal education in any of this stuff. I mean, in Canada, I'd never studied linguistics at that time. I have now. Now I studied linguistics many years later. But, I had no formal education, nothing. I mean, there was nothing. I had a political science degree. There was nothing that the only language I'd formally studied at that point was French and German. You know what I mean? But I was able to do it. So another, kind of for me, dramatic, more short-term example of fear-based learning. I was sharing an apartment with my ex-wife in England. So we were living in England. This is when we were in our own apartment, not before we had a house we shared with another person. We were sharing the rent on a house. This was in a small apartment, and there was a date on the calendar. And at first I didn't know the date because I hadn't bought the airplane tickets yet. And then I knew the exact date when we bought it. But there was a date coming up when I was going to have to fly to Cambodia. And I knew, I'd been to Cambodia before, short term, but I'd never lived there before, like permanently. And I knew exactly what I was going to have to deal with, exactly what I was going to have to struggle with when I got to Cambodia. So in terms of, it's like, all right, I'm going to have to get off the airplane. I'm going to have no cellular phone. I'd never owned a cellular phone up until age 36 or something. I'm going to have no bank account. All the money in the world I have is going to be in my boot or hidden in different pockets. And Phnom Penh at that time, and again, this is not hysteria, it was a city where people get held up at gunpoint in the streets. And I myself knew 2 different white people who were held at gunpoint. It's not like I was making a survey, you know what I mean? Yeah. And actually from the rooftop of my apartment building, not infrequently you'd hear gunshots going off. Phnom Penh was the real deal at that time. It was a third world dangerous city in transition. And again, keep in mind, naturally, criminals are going to single out someone who's white, Western, and looks wealthy from their perspective. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do? Say to the criminals, why don't you guys focus your energy on robbing the indigent poor? Why aren't you focused on robbing your fellow Cambodians or farmers or homeless people? No. Obviously, they're going to rob somebody who looks like me, whether I'm rich or broke. You can't blame them. You're a target for crime. And no, but apart from the crime and danger aspect, there was just the difficulty where it was like, I'm going to get off this airplane, I'm going to be on the streets of Phnom Penh, and I'm going to have to find an apartment to rent. I'm going to have to find a landlord, out of a hotel room. And I did already have a job lined up. I did have a job. That's, why I was going at that time. I was going to start this job in Cambodia. But I knew exactly how tough that challenge was and how high. And I had a couple of weeks in that apartment in England. And I was waking up as early as I could wake up and working as hard as I could possibly work. And, you know, somewhere it's just when you're nervous and scared, as I say, I think it is really appropriate to talk about fear in this context. Fear is a motivation. Some days I woke up at 6:30 a.m. Some days I probably woke up at 5:30 a.m. You know, but like I was waking up full of nervous energy and pouring as much, you know, energy as I possibly could into learning basic Cambodian, which is an incredibly difficult language to learn, by the way. And I mean, I remember once, so I think it's the only time in my life when I've wept just due to stress, where I broke down weeping, and I wasn't sad, I wasn't upset, but I was just so pushing myself to the limit. Again, not even in terms of the number of hours in the day I was studying, but the intensity of it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, again, that was fear as the motivation for learning. And it, again, not an abstract, not unreasonable fear. I'd been to Phnom Penh. I knew exactly what I was putting myself into. And I was right. And when I got there, I mean, that was my situation. I had no bank account. I had my money in my boot. And, you know, I walked the streets. And I did find a landlord, you know, while I was staying in a hotel. But, you know, I had to go around and, you know, literally like walk the streets of Phnom Penh and look for little signs up saying for rent in Cambodian, and talk to the landlord in Cambodian. That's what that challenge is, right? And you're also trying to evaluate, like, is this landlord going to rob me?
Yeah, rip you
off. Is he going to rip me off on the price? But also, am I going to move in here? And then one day all my stuff is stolen, because it's the most likely person to rob you is your own landlord, or your landlord has his brother come over or something. You know, so you really gotta judge. Anyway, so fear as a motivation, I think, is normally left out of the discussion of these things, and it's probably the single most intense and effective motivation. Probably today you can see that with people like war refugees or other people who are. I do remember once seeing in a documentary about a guy in a refugee camp who taught himself English in only a few months and this kind of thing. You know, you do sometimes see evidence of that.
Yeah, but you can't really implement it in school. You can't bring back corporal punishment to school.
So for me, that's a separate heading. I think fear-based motivation. This is one of my
students with a ruler.
I had 4 types of motivation. I wanted to mention this video, whether or not we get to them. See, I think that's authority-based motivation, or you could say authoritarian motivation. Sure, yeah. I think that is different, and some people respond to that really positively. Some don't, and some respond to it positively for some subjects, but not others. Right?
Yeah.
So. When I was a kid, when I was younger, a teenager, I really noticed that I got more work done if I was sitting in a library. No, not even using the books, you know what I mean? Like just using the book I brought with me, you know. But that sitting in a library was more effective than sitting at my own desk, you know. And I was aware, well, it's just the kind of authoritarian ambiance of the setting, you know, and I'm getting more work done. Now, that's not true of me today. I think for me as a fully grown adult, I get exactly the same amount of work done at my desk and at the library, you know what I mean? But sure, ages 16 to 22, I think that was really true of me, that, you know, just putting yourself in that context, putting yourself in that library. And I think for a lot of people, if you think about what you get out of organized education at a university, in many ways, it's not much. It's like, okay, so here's a reading list. Like, you know, like literally, here's a photocopied syllabus or reading list for you to go home and work with. There are the books, and here's the essay you're supposed to write. You don't need a professor. You don't need a classroom to do that. You could just give yourself a reading list. You could download one off the internet, go to the library, do the work. For a lot of people, the main thing they're getting out of the university context is motivation. In exactly that sense, the authoritarian motivation. And indeed, you know, do teachers beat students? I think that's part of it too. I think that's part of a belief in authoritarian motivation. Now, again, I think it's both the case that some people will respond more positively than others, and it also really depends on the subject matter. Like maybe you can't learn math that way, but you can learn. You maybe respond positively with some other topic. You know, the type of learning, what have you. Yeah. So I think that's a tricky one, but I would mention, I think, just as with fear, people need to learn to embrace fear. That fear is an instinct we all live with. You know what I mean? Like not to demonize it, not to do this, not to do that. Yeah. I think likewise, you can learn to have a kind of positive attitude towards that authoritarian side of your own nature, if you have it to some extent, and you know you can put yourself in that setting. If you're watching this in a major city, even if you're not a university student, you can choose to go and do your work in a university library.
Yeah.
You know, you can pay the $5 for the membership card. I mean, most universities are like that, you know. They'll allow in outsiders under certain circumstances. You can put yourself in an archives or a university setting to get work done.
I know I got my best work done at this Michigan Law Library. It was beautiful, and rule was to not
a law student. She wasn't studying law, so right, yeah,
right,
you just chose the library.
Right, you don't have to be a law student to go there, but yeah, like what you're talking about, like the authoritarian atmosphere, and the rule was to be completely silent, and like that really benefited me. There was the undergraduate library was just too loud. But anyway,
I think one of these, sure, her university education was at a famous university in the States, but you had all class sizes that were too big. When you have smaller class sizes, one of the things that motivates students is the feeling that they will let the professor down. So I don't know if you ever were close enough to a professor to feel that way, where it's like, if I don't do my best work on this, and again, the professor isn't going to beat you, but I'll be letting the professor down. That can be a powerful motivator also. Yeah. So for myself, the main form of motivation in my life has been what I call mission-based learning. And I don't really encourage people to use this mode of learning, this mode of motivation. For me, it's much more tragic than it is, it's more tragic than it is anything else. For me, I'm someone who had really, really high, really, really intense levels of motivation for learning languages, studying history, studying politics. But in each case, it's linked to a particular mission, a particular outcome I'm in pursuit of. So, I'm not studying Korean and Ojibwe for the good of my health or something, Mm-hmm. I'm really on this mission where there's a vision of a career and humanitarian motives and research motives and outcomes I'm pursuing. And very often it does seem like a superpower. It seems like I'm getting so much more done and learning so much faster than all the other people around me. But the flip side of that is then when the mission comes to an end, and most of these missions for me ended in failure where I had to stop learning Cree, then it's a crushing disappointment. It brings about terrible suffering. It's a real personal tragedy. It's a personal tragedy that first and foremost impacts me much more and much more deeply than, for example, the death of my own father, which really didn't impact me that much. I regard death as part of life. It doesn't come as a shock. Yeah. And my father died of natural causes at a very old age. That's not very shocking to me. The death of my various grandparents, likewise. It's like, well, did you think they'd live forever? It's not that tragic. But sure, when I've put in hundreds of hours of intense effort to try to memorize the names of the months in Cree, for example, there are 12 months in the year. In Cree, they're all really long words. You're trying to do basic math in Cree to learn the numbers. Every language has this, learning numbers and the months and the seasons. And there's a lot of vocabulary just to get started in the language. And then, boom, the mission is over. I'm never going to use this again. And I look back and it almost feels like brain damage. It's not only that I don't have something positive, this is like something negative in my life now. I've sunk all this effort in and really like a part of my brain capacity into this. And now it's over and I'm never going to be able to use it again. For me, that's really tragic and really harrowing. And I've been through it again and again and again. Now, I think the stereotypical university student, we've just been reading a lot about this, utterly lacks this form of motivation.
Right.
A stereotypical, I think this probably is the majority, a stereotypical university student in the United States and Canada doesn't know what they want to study, doesn't know why they're there. They will often openly say they're just having a look around at different options. They're considering different subjects that might interest them. They're trying to find what fits, trying to find what they like, trying to find what motivates, this kind of thing. I appreciate their honesty. It's fine. But that is completely antithetical to the type of mission-based motivation I'm talking about, right?
Right.
And for me, again, the missions, whether it was learning Cambodian or learning Laotian or learning Pali, this long series of languages, very clear, very powerful link to humanitarian work, research, real-world outcomes.
Yeah, and not just a credential.
Right. Oh, yeah. For me, none of them were linked to a credential, actually, ironically.
That's how a lot of students,
right.
That's how they study.
Sure. I'd prefer to get credentials if I can.
The least amount of work to get their credential.
Yeah. So mission-based motivation, I've got to say, if you look at a snapshot of it, and a lot of people who met me in each of those fields, they found it really inspiring to meet me. And I'm sorry, I'm not boasting, I'm not exaggerating, but I met people. Okay, so for example, I'd meet someone with a PhD, someone who's a professor or an archivist. They're not always professors, sometimes they work in the library or archives. And they would be so inspired to meet me because the people they were dealing with were always people who either had no motivation or had this kind of negative, dragging their ass motivation. You know, it was like, oh, well, I've got to do this. I've got to do this thing to get through my MA. I don't really want to. It's not a thing. Like, even if they were dealing with MA and PhD students, and then they'd meet me, I wasn't in a PhD program, but I was so positively motivated and I was really making progress. And so a lot of those people, they really lit up when they met me. And I'd be such a contrast to the other students or other researchers they dealt with. Like, even with journalists, you can deal with journalists who are just like, oh, I'm on this assignment. Seriously, I met journalists of that in Cambodia. So some newspaper had paid for their airplane ticket to fly, but they're like, oh, I don't even know why I have to cover this court case in Cambodia. I mean, you know, nobody cares. You know, it's natural. You can relate to it. So having that motivation in a lot of ways in my life was a positive thing. And I did get a huge amount done in all those languages in a relatively short span of time. But the flip side is the sorrow, the sense of personal tragedy. And I wanted to include this in the video, but look, like, I wept when I gave away my Laotian dictionary. It's not because the dictionary was worth a lot of money, but I remember when I gave it because it's everything it represented. It's like, well,
so much time.
Right. That's 2.5 years of hard work, and sometimes unbelievably hard work, you know, with no electricity under a mosquito net. It wasn't like that in the capital city, but when I was doing humanitarian work, you know, living in these really extreme, rugged conditions. And now I'm giving this book away, and I'm never going to use this language again. Like Laotian, unless I go to the suburbs of Paris, who's even going to speak Laotian with me? You know what I mean? We saw one Laotian guy when we were in France together.
Yeah, that's right.
But I couldn't do it. I couldn't snap back into language that quickly. You know? Because I've been speaking I was speaking French and Chinese and Thai. Recently. Yeah, so whatever. Within that month, I'd been speaking 3 or 4 other languages. So anyway. But yeah.
I was really excited to see you when you...
When I spoke Lao with him? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just said a couple words to him in Lao. And then he was all excited, wanting to speak to me in Laotian, but I couldn't snap back that quick. Anyway, actually, and after we walked away from him, then already it was coming back to me. Anyway, look, when I gave away that dictionary, I mean, that whole scenario was a really deep personal tragedy for me. The end of that mission that had motivated me so much. And I was surrounded by people who totally couldn't comprehend it and didn't care. You know, so you're surrounded. What kind of white people are around you there? I was in Thailand, and then I went up to China, to Yunnan at that time. So, you know, so the average white person who's either on vacation in Thailand or retired in Thailand, or even who has some kind of job as an ESL teacher, these are just people enjoying life. They have none of that humanitarian motivation, none of that research motivation, and they don't get it. You know what I mean? Now, I think also as a white person in Canada, when I had the crushing blow of having to stop studying Korean at Ojibwe, I'm surrounded by white people who just
don't give a fuck.
They're like, you know, well, what's the problem? You know, like, oh, you should get a job in marketing.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, you should get a job in real estate. You'll be great. And it's like, dude, this, you know, do you have any idea what's just happened in the last couple of years of my life? Like what I've gone through and what I've lost and what position I'm in now in terms of my own lost potential and my own sense of like lost brain tissue. You know what I mean?
Probably just like, why do you think that you're special?
So for me as a large self-confident, nobody ever says that to me. Like maybe that's a gendered thing. Nobody ever says to me, why do you think you're special? Yeah. You know? But so, like, maybe I do a good job of presenting. Here's why I'm special. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Just that you would devote years of your life to that rather than marketing. You know, I can see people being like, just defensive about it. Sure,
defensive and or offensive about it.
Yeah.
So the fourth, I don't know if we've gone through. I think we've gone through all four. The fourth and final type of mode of learning and motivation for learning I wanted to mention. There's a quote. Oh, that's cool. Like yawn all you want. You can eat noodles on camera too. Yeah, you got dojang. You can eat on camera. I don't mind. Look, you know, the fourth and final type I wanted to mention is from this comment from Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon is a philosopher, and really his most important work is the Novum Organon, which is very rarely read. People don't read that book. I don't know why. It is his most important work of philosophy. But in it he says the ideal state of mind for learning is one that combines playfulness and seriousness. This is we are simultaneously being very playful and very serious. It's an interesting comment. I think a lot of people do talk about play and playfulness in learning, but that's actually a really strange tightrope to walk. You know what I mean? If you think about, because I mean, play is one thing, but if you don't have a very specific kind of motivation, play is just play, and it's not really learning. You know what I mean? Yeah. There are elements of play in language learning and language teaching, but I mean, that's maybe the most rare and difficult to sustain of attitudes, you know? I mean, well, even for me with Chinese, you don't see me playing a lot of games with Chinese. You don't see me having a lot of fun learning Chinese. I'm now advanced enough. You know what I mean? Whether it's Chinese or Laotian or Cree, like I can sit and I can cut up some words on a little piece of paper and throw them on the floor and play some kind of game or something. But it's tough and it's rare. I mean, Francis Bacon was mostly thinking about the sciences of trying to keep a playful...
Adults?
Okay. Trying to keep a playful attitude.
I know for kids, it's really important to have play involved with learning from a very young age. You know?
Okay, well, but you've just been doing that. How successful are you with play and learning? Because I think, like, with your students, I would say most of the time when it's play, it's just play.
No,
the play doesn't have...
They learn head, shoulders, knees, and toes.
Yeah, right.
But yeah.
So anyway, for me, I don't know, but maybe I'm just the wrong person to speak on that. But I think that's actually a really difficult,
I don't know. Tightrope to walk. It's kind of easy to plan that for little kids, but I don't know how to even older, as old as, or as young as like teenage age, like how do you involve play and learning.
So the 4 types I wanted to cover here: mission-based learning, fear-motivated learning, which is maybe really overlooked, the role of authoritarian, even if it's just the atmosphere of authority, like being in a library in learning. And then this kind of question for me, opening question of play-based learning. Yeah. And so I've mentioned this to you recently, back when I was studying Korean and Ojibwe especially, when I worked with some other languages too. Yeah, when I worked with Pali and Social, I tried to get in touch with video game programmers. And I talked to several, saying, why can't we have software that allows people to at least practice these languages? Like maybe not completely educational software. Why can't we translate Pokemon into Cree or Ojibwe, like, a card-based game, so that at least the words are there and being practiced and so on? Can't we do something along these lines? So I have taken an interest in play-based language education and the role of play in at least practicing vocabulary and so on.
Yeah.
But there is goddamn little out there. There is very little, even for a language like Japanese. I really searched through all the software for learning Japanese education. I found nothing.
There's the one game.
Found next to nothing.
For Chinese that you showed me. But
Yeah.
Doesn't look like you've played it.
But Chinese has 1 billion speakers and probably 100 million people learning it, because there's so many people in the West and even in other countries in Asia, in Korea and so on, learn Chinese, and there is next to nothing. So it is weird. Maybe that'll make a comeback, but right now the role of play and learning. Obviously, video games are just one example. You use wooden blocks for all I care. There are all kinds of ways to incorporate play into learning. Yeah. It seems to be really, really waning right now, really weak.
Yeah, I had fun playing with blocks with Alexandra.
Yeah.
The ones that had Chinese.
Yeah, that's true. We had Chinese educational blocks for my daughter. Yeah.
That helped me learn, some of the words.
So my basic warning in this video, it's funny, motivation is perceived as this kind of meta virtue, as what separates good students from bad students, and even what separates good people from bad people. Why is he a good person? Because of how he's motivated. He has bad motives, he has bad intentions. We think about it in this way. But I think motivation runs deep. Everyone knows that. And I do think when you're talking about like what motivated me to learn the Lao language, why did I make so much progress really in 1 year with Lao language? I got up to a level, Lao was the only language I've learned where I could make jokes that really made people laugh. I would be able to spontaneously make original jokes, and Lao people would really break out laugh. They really appreciated my sense of humor. I'm not at that level in Chinese, still to this day. I don't think I've once told an original joke in Chinese that made people laugh. Not even once. But very different time in my life, and very different language. I don't know. I never made up any original jokes in Korea.
I don't think it was a joke, but I don't know if you remember we bought strawberries once, and you told them like that I'm crazy. It's not a problem for me though. It's a problem for you.
You're right. You're right.
I'm stupid, so it's a problem for you, but not for me.
Okay, so that I made a joke with some strawberry vendors that even though I'm stupid, it's not really my problem, it's their problem, right? Yeah. That may be the only joke I've made in Chinese that made people laugh. And they did laugh. That's right. We had a whole group of people and they laughed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I said, I'm stupid, but it's not my problem. Like, I'm not embarrassed to admit to you that I'm stupid. You're the ones who have to figure out how many kilograms of strawberries I'm buying here, not me. So if I'm stupid, it's your problem. Yeah. They really broke it. Like, okay, great. So thanks. My girlfriend saved me on that. I made one joke ever in Chinese that afterwards I explained to you why everyone was laughing. Right. But look, motivation runs deep. It runs all the way deep. And for me, the extremely high levels of motivation I had, whether I was cracking the books during that short period of time with Cambodian in that apartment, or over long periods of time with languages like Pali, Laotian, which I had no teacher in. I had no teacher, I had no help, I had no encouragement, I had no textbooks. I had to make my own textbooks for some of those languages. Being super highly motivated for some of these things also was linked to a tremendously deep, soul-destroying personal tragedy that many people can't relate to. I mean, that is kind of the ongoing tragedy of my life. As much as I've endured suffering under other headings, with the death of my father, being separated from my daughter, which is incredibly harrowing, I do say to people routinely, look, actually, the real defining tragedy of my life is higher education in Canada, is the university system and these things. So, yeah, that's my judgment on motivation as a highly motivated autodidact. For the most part, when I talk to people about it, I warn them against it because I warn them about the real drawbacks, the real extent to which your own personal sorrow and suffering is involved if you take this path. All right.